podcast, everyone. I'm here with Connelly, expert in the blockchain and crypto space, but also has great experience in social impact with her experience with Médecins Sans Frontières. Anne, great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Anne, I think one of the reasons we wanted to have you on this podcast is to talk about the changes in board governance, right? Particularly this concept of decentralized governance. It has a lot to do with the blockchain and crypto space. And, you're an expert in the field and you have great experience in social impact. Maybe for our audience, give us an overview of what decentralized governance is.
Yeah, so when you think about traditional corporations or nonprofits, you really have like one person at the top that's making decisions on behalf of everybody else. And what we're finding in the blockchain space is that we've shifted to this new decentralized model where we shift the power from the top to the community of users that are part of that system or that organization. And so this essentially is called a DAO or a decentralized autonomous organization. And it essentially works the same way, kind of like a co-op might, where everybody has a share in the outcome of what their organization is doing. Now, DAOs can be used for anything, as long as you have a common goal. Could be something like we want to clean a beach together, or run a protest, or we want to build a new piece of technology, or run a real estate corporation. But essentially, what it does is it enables all of these people that are a part of the community to vote on what the future of that community is going to be. So it's a really exciting new way, essentially, of achieving common goals that we have as large groups, but doing it in a way that doesn't have these traditional hierarchies that we're so used to in corporate structures.
Super interesting, and it kind of seems to fit the vision and ideals of, I guess, social impact and nonprofits. I think the big question is, I mean, we've seen a lot of even for-profit and nonprofit. There's a little bit of resistance in terms of, let's say, a decentralized governance. What are some of the things if a nonprofit or anyone else listening in an organization with social cause should be considering related to decentralized governance?
So one of the things I find the most interesting is even if you're in a very flat organization like a nonprofit, maybe you only get the chance to re-vote for your board directors every 3 years, or maybe you don't even have voting control over them. They just, are elected. And so with a DAO, we use something called essentially vote delegation or liquid democracy is how we refer to it, where you can actually take your votes and delegate them to another person. And you can immediately revoke that delegation at any point in time. So let's say there's a really important vote on a security protocol that you want to implement. And I'm like, listen, I don't know anything about security. I don't really feel comfortable evaluating this and voting on it. I'm going to delegate my votes to Eric, who knows a whole lot about this, and he's going to vote on my behalf. But then if the next vote is something about, let's say, project management, or maybe something that really directly affects beneficiaries, and you're like, actually, I know a lot about this, or my friend Sarah is really excellent at this, I'm going to delegate my votes to her. So you have this incredible power kind of shift where you're voting on totally different issues, which is really neat. And if at some point in time you delegate to somebody because you think they're fabulous, and then maybe you start to disagree with some of their views, you have this incredible power to shift where your votes are going at any point in time. And so I think it provides the communities of nonprofits and other organizations just this incredible fluidity and flexibility and power to these users in a way that we don't see in traditional organizations, even the most flat ones.
It's interesting you bring that up. I mean, then as stakeholders, not just shareholders, but stakeholders, in many respects, we have to pay more attention to not only the strategic vision of the organization, but also the operational. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, if you're participating in a DAO and you want to vote on all of these different issues, it's going to take a lot of time. If you delegate, of course, you can get rid of that time, but then, you do have to trust in sort of that big overall vision. But the neat thing about it is that that vision can change according to the will of the stakeholders. So if you were working for a corporation, for example, and they had, this big goal that was they're going to be, let's say, a venture capital fund, and you were one of the community members of that fund, you don't really have a lot of say in what happens to it. And there was a really interesting example of a decentralized venture capital fund called BitDAO, where the community decided partway through, actually, we don't want to be a VC fund. We want to build things.
Hmm.
And they changed their name, they changed their whole purpose, and it was all based on what the community wanted. And so I think there's, again, this beautiful flexibility where, you can shift the goals of an organization according to what the stakeholders are really desiring, based on shifts in time and culture and environment, to suit the needs of the people that are involved.
Interesting. We've talked about some of the benefits and how it's very transparent and very, I guess, fluid with the changes around the organization. Maybe talk to us about some of the pitfalls or some of the potential issues that have occurred with decentralized governance.
Yeah, so one of my favorite examples, I think, of where things went wrong was a DAO called Proof of Humanity. And they essentially had two groups that came together and wanted to achieve something really incredible. And that essentially that what that was creating an anti-Sybil technology. So how do you prove that one person is one person and is not, opening 10 accounts to get the benefits of 10 people? And the other half really wanted to be able to do a universal basic income. And so, in order to do that, they needed to make sure one person was one person. So, they came together, they created this incredible protocol that was an identity mechanism, essentially. And the organization slowly started to have fissures in it. And the fissures really came around a couple of things. And one was kind of, as you mentioned in the previous question, that overarching strategy or the goal they were trying to achieve was a little bit different for each side. So the side that wanted to do the identity mechanism was very tech savvy. The rules were very rigid. They didn't want to have any flexibility at all. And then the other side was a lot more social. They wanted, to get money to people who needed it. And if rules needed to be bent, maybe that was okay. And then there was also a void between sort of English speakers and Spanish speakers, and they
Hmm.
had different Telegram groups, so the messaging was different in for each of those populations. And what ended up happening was they had a bit of a civil war, you could say, a digital civil war, where they ended up actually splitting into two factions because they couldn't get along as a community. And so now there are two separate communities, kind of working in a way that they want to work. But it was it was unfortunate how it all played out, but I think people maybe underestimate the need or the value in having a really strong overarching goal that everybody is behind at the beginning. And you can shift that over time, but you do really have to make sure that everybody's pretty dedicated to what the main outcome is supposed to be.
I'm going to poke on that a bit more
Yeah.
because I think, everyone likes to think, oh, we have an overarching goal that we all believe in, like freedom of expression or whatever. But then when you go down to the level of details, you end up with those fissures. So if someone were interested in doing a decentralized government, how do we kind of either A, prevent that, or it's virtually impossible, or how do we make sure that, hey, you really are interested in this vision and are aligned with its execution, the details, in other words.
Yeah, so one of the greatest challenges is really making sure that minority voices are heard. And sometimes that can be a challenge in groups where decisions are literally made by, the vote of the majority. How do you factor that in? I mean, these are problems we're still trying to find effective solutions for. I can't say we definitely have the answer. But one of the most beautiful things about these DAOs is like any single person can put forward a proposal and everyone looks at it and everyone evaluates it, takes their time with it. Whereas if you were in a more hierarchical structure, maybe you would go to your manager and say, I've got this great idea. I think we should do this. And the manager can pretty much immediately shut it down. And so, in a case of a DAO, if someone's got an idea, as long as they can convince a certain number of people it's worthwhile doing, then they can get, that type of momentum. But it's tricky because with DAOs, like, let's say you were voting on maybe a strategic council that was going to do some more work, or maybe you were voting on people to do, yeah, have a paid full-time job underneath the DAO. maybe people are going to vote more for white men over other people because it's just how biases work. And so, how do you counter some of these issues within these structures? And that's one of the challenges that we're trying to overcome.
Um, you bring up an interesting point. So, I mean, what are some of the, let's call it mechanisms that they've been experimenting with in order to overcome some of those challenges you've highlighted?
So one of the key things is looking at how you get votes within a DAO. So some DAOs, say a venture capital or an investment type one, would allow you to buy tokens. And if you say got one token for $1, someone who put $50 in would get 50, someone who put 1 million in would get 1 million. And so you have this immediate imbalance between, people who are rich and people who are poor. Other issues that can come up would be like, some people say, well, you can only get tokens by earning them, by, volunteering or working for the DAO, which, can be good, but also can prioritize people that maybe have spare time. They don't have a chronic illness or children, or, they have time they can put into this, which other people might not. One way to get around that is to try to do a one person, one vote system, which can have some benefits, but then doesn't factor in how many hours somebody might be putting into the DAO over somebody else. And so there's really like, I think you can structure DAOs any way you want, and it comes down to what's the ethos of how you want to operate. And different DAOs will choose different ethos of how they want to do things. And I think the trick is just finding a DAO that fits your philosophy.
Interesting. Kind of poking at it a bit more, but from an operational perspective, right? So
Mm.
we've seen recently that in, let's say, consensus-driven organizations, the decision making is a lot slower, right? And that may impact the speed at which it can respond to crises or even effectively put out, let's say, operational elements, right? Like getting execution. What do you say to people that, they think about this and they're saying, well, this is another way of participating democracy, and I see it's already slow anyway. I kind of am leaning towards maybe a more top-down approach, I think is a nice way of putting it. So, what do you say to that? And how do we overcome that so we can execute and actually serve the vision that these organizations have? Oh,
Yeah, so sorry. You froze there for a sec, but I think that's on my.
all
Um,
good.
I think there's a couple sides to this. And the first one, from a speed perspective, I think DAOs have an incredible ability to spin up very, very quickly. So if you look at Constitution DAO, this is a really interesting use case where essentially a group of people saw that the US Constitution, an original copy of the document, was going up for auction. And they thought, like, it's absolutely crazy that this document that governs so many of us is going to be owned by one single rich guy. And so within, I think, about 48 hours, they pulled together, I think it was roughly 17,000 people who donated over $40 million to collectively buy this document. And if you think about how on earth would you do that if you didn't operate in a DAO structure or you didn't have access to cryptocurrency and blockchain? You'd have to find someone that could, open a bank account, you'd have to trust them that you were going to send the money and they weren't going to steal it. You'd have to find out some way of like, how do you prove collective ownership? Maybe you'd have to start a corporation, who's managing that, who's liable. It's a lot of work. And so to be able to pull that together in 48 hours is quite wild. But then when, as you say, as things start operating, um, it's a lot of time investment to go and sit and read all the proposals and evaluate them. And what a lot of DAOs are doing is really having little micro hierarchies within the DAO for operational purposes. So little project teams that you're paying to kind of offload work for, or having, certain teams where either they're going to review every single proposal and, do summaries and evaluations and critiques. Um, and that can be really helpful because the power, again, still remains with all of the community and the user base. Whereas in, a traditional structure where there's hierarchies, the decision making and the power and, the operations lie within that same structure.
Interesting. So definitely is representative of the ethos, I guess, of the social impact space. So, I
Mhm.
mean, you've done many things in your career. You've worked in social impact. Now you're in the blockchain space. Would you recommend that, I guess, boards of directors or executive directors or just, organizational leaders, they look at this? And if yes, what should they be looking for? Like, what should they be thinking about internally to maybe set up to eventually transition, excuse me, to a DAO?
Yeah, every board should absolutely be looking at this because it's a completely transformative new way to govern, and it really brings, the community into focus as a part of that, and really, looks at who's a part of our mission, who are our stakeholders. And maybe a good example I can lay that out before I sort of finish off is there was a company called Shapeshift that was a very traditional company. They were building, a crypto exchange. They had an office in Denver, they had 200 employees, and they decided, actually, we want to convert to being a DAO. And so they took their company, they shut it down, on paper, but every investor, every employee, they all received an allocation of what they called Fox tokens, these kind of voting tokens. And then they would pay everybody in Fox tokens. But not only did they have that for the employees, they had that for anyone who had ever used the exchange. So if you had ever gone on and you were like a user of their platform, you also received an interest in voting on what happened with it moving forward. And so that was just this incredible way of saying, actually, you guys are the people that are using this. You deserve a say in where it's going. And so I think that applies also to nonprofits and to anyone working, in governance is really historically you've been making decisions on behalf of other people. And maybe the shift now is that the stakeholders you've been voting on their behalf deserve a vote, or at least the option to have that vote, or the option to choose who is voting on their behalf. And so I would really recommend that everyone who's in the governance space gets up to speed about, first of all, how blockchain works, how it applies, in these DAO settings, and look at a few of the different examples that are out there. I think there's over 3,000 DAOs right
Oh,
now.
wow.
And they control, oh goodness, how much is it? I mean, there's one DAO I know of that controls over $5 billion in assets alone. So
Hmm.
when you combine them all, I think you're probably 10 or 20 billion as it stands right now. So this is growing. I mean, the estimation is that by 2032, DAOs are going to control $1 trillion worth of assets. And so it's just a really interesting way of, organizing enormous groups of people over huge geographic areas to achieve the outcomes that you really want to achieve.
Interesting that, that's on such a growth trajectory. And I think you hit on something a bit is, do you find that it's especially for boards of directors, that it's almost like a mindset shift in terms of recognizing it's like, hey, the power should not be centralized in me, even though, it's nice to have that power.
Yeah.
But it's like I should be the conduit for stakeholders. So it's kind of like encouraging that mindset shift in or via technology in some respects.
Yeah, and I think it's also an extra layer of accountability, which of course,
Mm.
the board is there for oversight. But who's overseeing the board? I've seen a lot of examples where certain board members were not fulfilling their duties, they weren't showing up. And the populace just has no way to really deal with that, or it might be a long process to get that done. Whereas, you can vote with your tokens and just say, listen, like I don't want to give this person control anymore, or they shouldn't have oversight if they're not paying attention. And so I think there's, yeah, definitely a really interesting philosophical shift about what the role of a board director is, and how to incorporate the stakeholders into that process in a much more meaningful way.
And in some respects, even with the examples, both good and bad, in terms of decentralized governance, you kind of highlighted something where by decentralizing it, you're allowing the organization to respond more quickly, right? Versus, let's say, we have a very intransient board of directors that still, let's say, stuck in the past and refusing to adapt to the 21st century. So it sounds like with decentralized governance, we're moving to that era where we shift quickly in order to be responsive and not held back by, let's say, one or two individuals who might be
Mhm.
not with the times, to be blunt.
Yeah. Yeah, you get a CEO that doesn't want to move forward with tech things, or there's, shifts in You want more DEI and it's just not happening. Like there's lots of ways to try to drive that forward. And I think also lots of ways for individual contributors to just say, listen, I want to roll with this. Do you guys vote that I should get X and Y budget to be able to make this happen? Who wants to be involved? Like it really supports and encourages individual contributions to move forward or new and exciting ideas to get funded. And that's what I find really exciting as well, is like if you have a big mission or vision that everyone is behind, but people often feel stifled because they have to wait for instructions from on high or for, volunteer opportunities to appear or, for whatever it is that they're told to do. And, a lot of people are just sitting there ready and waiting or might have great ideas that maybe the folks on top just don't have the time to navigate to roll out. And here's a great way of just saying, yeah, the whole community thinks this is awesome. Roll with it and let's see where it goes.
Interesting. If people were looking for additional resources or in order like to learn more about decentralized governance, like you said, blockchain, etc., other elements, where would you point them to?
So I would point you to two books. The first one is called How to DAO. It's written by Kevin Owocki, who's an incredible leader in the DAO space. And if you're working on the nonprofit side, I would definitely recommend my book, which is a book all about essentially how to set up crypto donation programs and what Bitcoin and blockchain can do for nonprofits. And it is called, I can't remember what it's called. It's my own book. I should know this.
Don't worry, it happens to all authors. It's like, we forgot
Bitcoin
it.
and the future of fundraising. That's what it's called. Bitcoin and the future of fundraising. You can find it at bitcoinfundraising.com or on Amazon. And I would check out those two books.
Excellent. Well, and I was great talking with you. Any final words for our audience?
I think the biggest piece of advice is don't be afraid of blockchain and crypto. It can be very intimidating, but I encourage you to just go out and open a wallet and buy $1 worth of Bitcoin just to have a really good educational experience, see how it goes. Don't go investing your life savings if you don't want to, but just go drop $1 in there and just get an understanding of kind of the basics. And I think that'll help you feel a lot more comfortable with moving forward with some of the other more exciting applications of decentralized technologies.
Excellent. Well, and thank you very much for joining the podcast and look forward to future ones.
Sounds great. Thank you.